Thank you, Travis, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Regional News. We start off in Barbados, where plans for students to return to full-time in-person instruction in Barbados have been delayed to the recent spike in COVID-19 cases. In December, Minister of Education Sunita Bradshaw had announced that students would be heading back to the classrooms for regular instruction. But amid the recent spike in coronavirus cases, which led to a 2-week extension of the Christmas vacation, Minister Bradshaw announced that the second term of the 2020-2021 academic year will begin next Monday, with classes being taught online. The virtual classes are being conducted as authorities seek to bring the COVID-19 outbreak, said to be triggered by a Boxing Day super spreader event, under control. Minister Bradshaw also gave the assurance that the ministry was working to ensure every student had access to a device. She revealed that over 8,680 students had received devices during Term 1, which was also disrupted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. At that time, there was a blended approach to teaching, as there was a mix of face-to-face and online classes at some schools, while others were able to continue within the classroom setting. The head of the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, underscored on Tuesday that no effort should be spared to keep children in school as the coronavirus pandemic continues into a second year. And I quote, "Despite overwhelming evidence of the impact of school closures on children, and despite increasing evidence that schools are not drivers of the pandemic, too many countries have opted to keep schools closed, some for nearly a year," end of quote, Henrietta Fore said in a statement. The UNICEF chief highlighted that the cost of closing schools have been devastating, with 90% of students globally facing shutdowns at the peak of the COVID disruptions last year, leaving more than a third of school children with no access to remote education. And I quote, "The number of out-of-school children is set to increase by 24 million to a level we have not seen in years and have fought so hard to overcome," end of quote, she said. And I quote, "Children's ability to read, write, and to do basic math has suffered, and the skills they need to thrive in the 21st century economy have diminished," end of quote, Ms. Fore added. And now for some court news. A Jamaican man faces a possibility of up to 40 years in prison in the United States and a massive fine after being charged with smuggling a kilogram of cocaine in coffee bags and picture frames. Perez Omar Gibbs, 37, appeared before U.S. Magistrate Judge Kathy Walder by video conference this week on one count of importation of a controlled substance and was remanded without bail. According to documents filed in the case and statements made in court, Gibbs arrived at the Newark Liberty International Airport in New Jersey abroad a flight from Montego Bay, Jamaica on January 9. And I quote, "Law enforcement officers discovered that Gibbs possessed about 1 kilogram of cocaine concealed inside 2 bags of coffee and 4 picture frames," end of quote, said the U.S. Attorney's Office of District of New Jersey. Gibbs' charge carries a mandatory minimum penalty of 5 years in prison, a potential maximum penalty of 40 years in prison, and a $5 million fine. And finally, the House voted on Tuesday night to formally call on Vice President Mike Pence to use the 25th Amendment to strip President Trump of his powers after he incited a mob that attacked the Capitol, as lawmakers warned that would impeach the president on Wednesday if Pence did not comply. Lawmakers, escorted by armed guards into a heavily fortified Capitol, adopted the non-binding measure just before midnight, largely along party lines. The final vote was 223 to 205 to implore Mr. Pence to declare Mr. Trump, and I quote, "incapable of executing the duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president," end of quote. The House proceeded even after Mr. Pence rejected the call in a letter to Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Tuesday. And I quote, "I do not believe that such a course of action is in the best interest of our nation or consent with our Constitution," end of quote, he wrote. He continued to say, and I quote, I will not now yield to efforts in the House of Representatives to play political games at a time so serious in the life of our nation, end of quote. Almost all Republicans lined up in opposition. They did little to defend Mr. Trump's behavior but argued that Congress had no role telling the vice president what to do. Mr. Trump met with Mr. Pence on Monday for the first time since their falling out last week over the president's effort to overturn the election and the mob assault, which had put the vice president in danger. The two spoke for over an hour or more in the Oval Office in what amounted to a tense peace summit meeting with the remainder of the Trump presidency at stake. And that is it for our region news this evening, and I continue to urge our viewers to stay indoors, wear those masks, use those hand sanitizers, and continue practicing social distancing. Back to you, Travis.